Hello, everybody. My name is Dorota Olkowska. I am the sales manager at Shing Digital and working from home today, as you can see. And with me is Dmitry Sotnikov. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did, absolutely right.
Okay. It is, historically we were neighbors, so I should be able to pronounce your name correctly, Dmitry. Would you like to do a little introduction as to who you are?
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you, Dorota. So my name is Dmitry Sotnikov. I work for Netflix. Netflix is a software vendor that has software products for data security, data infrastructure, and identity security. And I work there as Vice President of Product Management. So my team is in charge of all the product roadmaps and all the products that we have. And I am based in Irvine, in Orange County, in Southern California.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dmitry. And I feel like we truly have an expert on hand. So at least fake it. You are an expert. You are an expert. So we're talking about incident response plans. As you know, we have been having these expert corners for cybersecurity, and today is the day that we need to talk about incident response plans. And I can't help but think of when I was in school, we would do these fire drills, right? Yeah. We would review the fire drills, we would do the pretend thing, we would all line up, it would be a chaos, then we would get feedback on how to do it better. And I'm simplifying things quite a bit, but from my perspective, this is kind of what we're talking about with regards to cybersecurity. So I have a few questions that I have set up, but just to remind everybody, and hello, Cheryl Ann, to remind everybody, please ask questions. This is not a presentation. As a matter of fact, Dmitry doesn't have any presentations. He doesn't have any PowerPoints. So this is truly a Q&A, and you don't want to hear me talk all the time. So please ask your questions so that Dmitry can share his expertise and we can provide you with some really good information as well. So I'm going to start out with the first question, which is the most obvious question outside of my description. What actually is an incident response plan?
Right. So incident response plan is just what it sounds like it is, right? It's your plan on what qualifies as an incident and who is the team, the people participating in the process, what their responsibilities are, and what kind of incidents you consider incidents, and sort of your playbook, your workflows of what you do with them.
So considering this, I know that I have spoken to some clients who are maybe a little bit smaller in size, and they say, hey, why would I even need an incident response plan? I have, 3 guys in IT here. We all know what to do. Why do I even need one?
Right. So sometimes you have to. So if you are like a lot of regulations actually formally require you to have one. So for example, the US Security and Exchange Commission requires that you have to have incident response plan for some incidents, for some breaches, for public companies. You have similar requirements in PCI DSS for credit cards, for the NERC regulations for the electric infrastructure companies, HIPAA regulations, FISMA, CIS, critical security controls, etc. So a lot of regulation actually require that you have incident response plan. And then secondly, so incidents is something, so it's not just any event, right? It's an event that's critical for your business. So if something critical for your business happens, like so suppose you have a malware attack, a successful malware attack, you need to understand that when it happens, when a successful malware attack happens, it's going to be too late to figure out what to do just on the fly, right? Because if you don't have a plan, then what you would likely have is that you would likely have your technical people who would figure out that something went wrong, right? That they would start figuring out what happened, collect information, etc. They will probably try to collect as much information as they can before they tell anyone. And so they'll be busy doing that. Meanwhile, the malware will be spreading and more systems will be going out. And then some customers would notice, they would start calling your whatever, your help desk, your customer service. Your customer service people will have no idea what to say. Then maybe your customer service systems will stop responding, etc. And then it will leak to media, to tweets, etc. They will start calling, again, your PR people who would have no idea. Then your management, your C-level people will realize, and then they will start asking questions. And then you'll try to find some forensic analysis company. And obviously you don't have anyone on retainer, so it will take time to find one and negotiate the contract. And it's just, it quickly becomes a total disaster, right? And whereas if you have a plan, if you know who is doing what and when and how, then you can start treating, like, everything becomes much more controlled, right? Your PR people will know what to say. Your proper teams will be notifying in time, etc., etc.
So also there is the human aspect of this, right? Yeah. And I would presume that we all think we're going to act really calmly in the face of an incident, but the reality is that unless you go through it step by step, you have not built in your mindset the realistic steps that have to happen. So that makes complete sense. The questions are coming, so I'm just going to get to them. Once you have a plan, how would you realistically test that plan without disturbing the business?
Right. So at the very least, so that the incident typically in companies, again, that there is some sort of incident response team. There are people in charge, right? That there's some people who can act as coordinators, etc. But it's a cross-team effort, right? So incident response, it's not just about your backup and recovery tool, or not just about your whatever your networking, or not just about endpoint security, right? It spans multiple teams. So at the very least, you need to do sort of table exercises when the people, the representatives from this team, from these teams, they get together, they go through the plan, they do some sort of a training in terms of how they would work, of the workflows, how they would work together on that. And then each team within their own area of responsibility, obviously they need to do testing, right? If it's a, say, if it's a team that's doing backup and recovery, right? They need to test their backups just like they would normally do, right? If the team is in charge of monitoring, right? And then they work with their monitoring tools, yes, obviously they need to make sure that their monitoring tools are running, etc. So it's not a one kind of huge exercise of letting them malware out in the wild and seeing what happens, right? It's creating that plan and the workflows, going through them together, figuring out who's responsible for which part, and then delegating that to each individual team.
Okay, thank you. Should your incident response teams plan and exercise frequently, like quarterly? How often would you go through that plan?
It depends on the company, right? The company size, etc. I think quarterly sounds like a good schedule to me, right? It's hard, obviously, to give an advice, kind of one size fits all advice. And obviously, one more thing. So you have your own kind of, you have your regular schedule, but it's also important to learn from whatever incidents that happen, right? So when something happens, you don't wait until whatever your next quarterly exercise, right? You do your lessons learned immediately after that. You do your post-mortem analysis, you figure out, you go through the whole process together with all the teams, figure out on each of the steps what went right, what went wrong, what needs to be changed in the procedures, etc.
Okay, there are so many questions coming in, which I just love. So let me see here. Let's go back to the top. How is an incident response plan different from a disaster recovery plan?
Okay, so the disaster recovery, the recovery piece is part of the incident response, but it's sort of your incident response would obviously contain the initial detection, the information that you collect to figure out whether you declare something as an incident. Again, as I mentioned, not every issue that you would have in your network, in your system, is an incident, right? Incident is something that is actually business critical, that impacts your business, right? So you would need to figure out what, for which systems, what kind of events qualify as incidents and at which threshold, right? Then you declare the incident. You have that process of declaring the incident and notifying people, etc. Then you have the procedures of containing the issue, right? So say if it's a malware spread, then what do you do to contain it? Then you have your forensic analysis, etc. And then you do have obviously your disaster recovery. So disaster recovery is an integral part of the incident response, but it's not the whole thing. It's a subset.
Gotcha. Thank you. Who are the key people within the organization that need to be part of an IR plan? And keep in mind, there are some attendees here who have small organizations and some who have large ones.
So it will be different depending on the organization. So I think every organization needs to compile what they call a RACI metrics, right? So figuring out who is responsible, accountable, who you just communicate to, etc., right? And so who would be coordinating the whole effort, and then for each of the steps, like for monitoring, for the containment, for recovery, for say notifying your customer response team, your PR team, your legal team, like who those individuals are. And so again, depending on in a small organization, you might have people wearing multiple hats. In the big organization, you would likely have a lot of teams and just representatives from the teams. So it's really hard to give a one-size-fits-all answer. And also even within IT, again, in a big organization, you would likely have, say, endpoint people being different than your network team, than your business applications team, than your backup and recovery team. So again, you would need to figure out all those teams and then figure out the individuals from them and their roles on each of the states, on each of the steps.
Okay, thank you. So this is a two-part question to make it more fun. Are there companies that specifically deal with incident response, and do they usually just work on retainers? And part two, can internal IT teams do the IR plan?
That's a great question, because obviously, like how much of that process can be outsourced and which parts would need to be outsourced. Again, all organizations are different. I think that in general, since incidents, as I mentioned, incidents are business critical events, right? That's something that is critical for your business. And so I would think that at least like anyone who needs to be able to make decisions on behalf of your company, of the enterprise, would likely need to be an internal person. Like the person declaring the incident, it is a business decision. It's not like if someone in your company clicked a link in the email and they got they got malware on their computer, it's not necessarily an incident yet, right? If that doesn't have any business critical consequences, it's not an incident, right? And so who makes that decision? Who figures out that yes, it is a breach happened, we have our customer data compromised, or maybe it's not compromised, etc., etc. So that those kind of roles, I think, have to stay within the company. Anyone who makes sort of a decision on behalf of the company would need to stay inside. And then some items would probably be more prone to be outsourced, like forensics team probably makes sense to have one on retainer. So when something goes wrong, you have specialists who have been dealing with with forensic analysis, and you already know what kind of data they need. They already know what kind of tools you have and their configurations, etc. So those things probably make sense to outsource and have them on retainer. So again, hard to give one size fits all answer, but definitely some parts are easier to outsource and some have to stay within the company.
And I'm going to do just a shameless little Shing Digital plug that if you don't quite know, we can provide you with that guideline. Just a little sideline plug. Okay, next question. In smaller organizations, there are often not multiple IT people assigned to each area. So often the entire incident response is held in the hands of few. So separation of duties and the potential for tribal knowledge to walk out the door is high. So prevention appears to be the responsibility of every employee. Can you speak to how that can be managed, documented, and distributed?
Right.
Great question.
Yeah, it's a loaded question. So prevention, absolutely, right? Prevention has to be part of what everyone in the company is aware of, right? So by all means, have security training for your employees, right? Tell them about whatever. If they find a USB drive on their way to the office, they don't need to pick that USB key and plug that into their office.
Does anybody even use USB drives? Like, I'm afraid.
Yeah, or whatever, links in the email, the attachments, etc., etc. So by all means, prevention is something that you have to do, right? It's not part of the incident response plan, but it's something that would absolutely make your life less stressful and reduce the probability of the response of the incidents. In terms of documenting and tribal knowledge, etc., I am a fan of documenting things for documenting your incident response plan, even if you don't have regulations that require you to do that. Again, because incidents, by definition, these are business critical events. These are extremely stressful, and also, if you have that tribal knowledge in that, like in a particular head of just one person, that's an additional risk. Well, what happens if that person happens to be on vacation that day somewhere, whatever, in the mountains on another continent, outside of reach, right? And also, if you don't have the plan and your workflows documented, how do you test them? How do you discuss them? How do you run that across your organization? And how do you improve that when you have your lessons learned? So I am a fan of documented procedures and again, for keeping them simple, straightforward. That doesn't have to be an academic exercise. It has to be realistically the events that can happen, that are likely to happen, that can have severe consequences, and the specific steps that you're going to take when that happens.
So on the heels of that, what resources would you recommend to follow to build out a proper documented IR plan?
There are some templates, right? There are companies like Shing Digital that can help.
Hello, we are here.
There are some resources on the internet. I think that analysts such as Gartner, they have their templates that you can reuse. So yes, by all means, don't reinvent the wheel. Use the templates that you can find.
Fantastic. Is having an incident response plan required for IT insurance?
I sincerely don't know. I don't think so. Maybe in some industries. I know that IT insurance, they started requiring some things like multi-factor authentication, etc. So I am not aware of incident response plan now being kind of mandatory for any IT insurance everywhere, but that would make sense. But again, I don't know.
To the person who asked that question, we are actually having the last one of our webinar series in 4 weeks that is specifically with an insurance organization around IT insurance. So we'll loop back with that particular question then. But really every year, these specifications that the insurance companies have are getting tougher and tougher. So it is very likely that that is part of the requirements, but we'll get that fully answered in 4 weeks' time. The next question, what are the critical things that need to be in place to prevent or lower the risk of a company getting into an incident? Another loaded question.
Yeah, in terms of prevention, again, we mentioned employee training. Least privilege obviously makes sense, right? If you have, like, if everyone is running as local admin, or if your IT admins, if they're using the same admin account across, like, on their laptop for everything they do, if whatever RDP remote desktop is open on your servers, etc., then any like anyone clicking any bad link immediately gets malware in your network, immediately enables threshold movement, etc. So again, in terms of prevention, zero trust, I know that zero trust is now sort of a very kind of a lot of companies are using that as a marketing term, so that might be a little vague, but in general, right? So least privilege, use, again, least privilege on your laptops. No one should be a local admin. Disable those USB key use. Enable multi-factor authentication. Do your password policies. Do use privileged access management solutions, so no one ever uses and no one ever has admin credentials, and they get temporarily enabled to perform the admin tasks, etc. So then yeah, just again, this privilege, zero trust, common sense, privileged access management solutions.
And for those of you who haven't attended our previous webinar series, we have quite a few that speak specifically to the things that we can put into place to prevent an incident in the first place, although there is nothing we can do to fully protect ourselves, but there are definitely certain best practices that we can put into place. I do just want to comment, because there have been a couple of great comments after the question with regards to insurance. One comment from Cash is, we see IR plans as part of most requirements, specifically in Canada with regards to insurance. We used to see IR requirements on 4 million plus cyber insurance, but now we are starting to see it for 1 million. And another comment from Cheryl Ann, any organization that is publicly traded, government or quasi-government, requires an IR plan to be compliant and will be reviewed in an audit. No plan, audit fail for IT. So great comments. Thank you very much.
Yeah, tech guidance includes that, right? So in the US, I know that US Securities and Exchange Commission requires IR plan.
Yeah. So shockingly, like, we have 5 minutes left. I swear these things go by so quickly. So what is a privileged access management system?
Okay, yeah, yes. So just a quick, whatever, I'll try to make it quick. So privileged access management solutions, or PAM. So basically, instead of, so that's a system that gives privileged access temporarily to your administrators when they need to do something, right? So when an administrator, they need to, whatever, reset someone's password, they cannot just start up whatever Active Directory users and computers and do that. They temporarily get those permissions to perform that one task, and then that gets revoked from them. And so depending on, like, there are more kind of legacy solutions that do that actually maintain those accounts and just temporarily issue them password, let them do that, and then regenerate the password. And so they're more of a password management for privileged accounts. There are some more modern privileged access management solutions that don't even have those accounts. Like they would generate an account on the fly. They would enable RDP session for that account on the fly. They would make that Active Directory users and computers use that account, and then once the job is done, they would again, revoke, disable RDP, disable the account, etc., etc. Record the session even, so you have that screen recording, etc., etc. So that's the kind of solution.
We have time for one more quick question, and that's it. How can Netflix software help with an incident or prevent an incident? And considering that you are the VP, we should really ask this question before we finish, I think.
I'll see. Yeah, it's going to be hard to do that in 3 minutes.
In 3 minutes, yeah.
I
this will really test you.
Hours about that. So what we do, we have products. We're a software company. We have products for basically all those stages related to IT security, all the way from figuring out what's going on, like figuring out your attack surface, like are you, whatever, how many people you have in admin groups, where you have the potential vulnerabilities. Then we have products that parts of the solution that enable you to establish that least privilege. So we remove all those rights. We will have privilege access management solution that enables your administrators to temporarily get those privileges, so that whole prevention piece. Then we have monitoring solutions that can detect attacks and can let you know when an incident happened. And then obviously solutions that help you with figure out what happened and do disaster recovery, like whatever the recovery Active Directory. So all the way we are trying to make sure that we give that comprehensive set of features and functionality across the spectrum.
Thank you. And of course, if anybody wants to know more, we can set up a meeting to explore that in more detail. I'm going to try to sneak in one more question because that's just how I roll. Let me see here. What are the tools that should be included in an incident response to prevent any issues from an attack coming from the deep web or the dark web? And how can we get it monitored?
Again, monitoring tools, right? So, and then again, figure out what your attack surfaces are, right? If we're talking about web servers, that would be some web access firewalls, like the web systems, that there are email hygiene solutions, there are password policy solutions against password attacks. So basically, you need to go through that list of attack vectors and figure out what you have for each and every one of them, figure out whether it can lead to an incident, to an actual business critical incident, what the threshold of that is. And actually, we haven't touched thresholds, but thresholds are important, because if you don't have that, basically you'll have a lot of noise, right? You'll have to treat each and every event as an incident, and then figure out for each and every one of them what kind of tooling you have in place already, or where you have gaps that you need to address.
Thank you. You won't believe this. We're like right on time. So thank you so much. These things go by so quickly. I appreciate everybody's questions. I appreciate your answers, Dmitry. It's lovely talking to you. This session is recorded. So in about a week's time or so, we're going to have it up on our website. So you can share it with anybody that you feel would benefit from this. And again, thank you very much for your attendance, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time when we have our next session. So thank you, Dmitry. Have a lovely day.
Thanks for having me here. And thanks.
Bye.
Bye.